But clearly one of the most dominant events of the week, and certainly one that made a tremendous spectacle, attracting attention not just in India, but all around the world. The Pran Pratishtha of the Ram Mandir at Ayodhya. Large number of people gathered out there. It was telecast live all across the country. Millions and millions of people watched that particular Pran Pratishtha. And of course, lakhs of devotees have gone to Ayodhya after that to get darshan at the Ram Mandir. But the occasion was not just filled with religious symbolism. It was also an occasion where the Prime Minister and others spoke out at some length, talking about how they felt it was a defining moment and a turning point for civilization and Indian civilization in particular. Let's listen, for example, to some of what the Prime Minister had to say on the occasion of the Pran Pratishtha.
राम भारत की आस्था है, राम भारत का आधार है, राम भारत का विचार है, राम भारत का विधान है, राम भारत की चेतना है, राम भारत का चिंतन है, राम भारत की प्रतिष्ठा है, राम भारत का प्रताप है, राम प्रवाह है, राम प्रभाव है। जब राम की प्रतिष्ठा होती है तो उसका प्रभाव वर्षों या शताब्दियों तक ही नहीं होता, उसका प्रभाव हजारों वर्षों के लिए होता है।
So Ayodhya, clearly the epicenter of all attention, and across cities and towns and villages, the fervor and the fever of devotees could hardly be missed. There were firecrackers and diyas being put everywhere. It was literally like a second Diwali in many ways. And as the crowds on the street chanted religious slogans, there were some dissent as well. Many of the 7,000 devotees were posting images from the event, but there were some who declined the invitations as well. Some of the opposition parties, for example, gave the consecration a miss, saying that it had become a political event, something that was being milked by the BJP and the RSS. The left parties called it the politicization of religious beliefs and said it was unconstitutional. The CPM said that the Constitution, the Supreme Court, barred the state from professing any particular religion or from having any religious affiliation. And there were objections from other quarters as well. Some of the Shankaracharyas, for example, objecting to the Pran Pratishtha, saying it is against the scriptures to hold a consecration ceremony before the entire construction of the temple has been completed. But a political significance, of course, in addition to the religious and the cultural aspects of it, were very, very clear. Politically, this is something which is seeing a lot of fervor across many parts of the country. Virtually anywhere you go, you've been seeing those flags there, the saffron flags there, celebrations taking place. And it is something that could, as we were telling you last week, have a very obvious impact on the 2024 general elections, which are just a few months away. But there are broader aspects also to discuss. And it being Republic Day, it is an important and a crucial time to be discussing some of the broader aspects of it, which were, as I said, spelt out rather clearly by the Prime Minister. He said it is a turning point. It is a turning point in Indian history and in civilization. And he said that the country should be happy and proud to see that we are all here at a point where we are seeing a turning point in Indian civilization. And of course, this has been quite a week because all of those images that we saw at the Pran Pratishtha of the Ram Mandir were then also juxtaposed with those absolutely beautiful images we see every year when the Republic comes and celebrates itself, the Republic of India on Republic Day on full display. This time, of course, President Macron was the chief guest, and we had these absolutely stunning images of the Republic Day parade, which we do every single year. And every year, Republic Day is a day to pledge ourselves once again to the Constitution, to the values that there are in the Constitution. And that, of course, has got a lot of people sitting and thinking and debating, and perhaps it's the right thing to do. We did hear what the Prime Minister was saying about, starting a new chakra, a new cycle, a new change where Indian civilization will rise in parallel with the rising of a modern India and in parallel with the continued rise of the Republic of India. How will all of this be done together, managed together in a manner that it can be done without any obvious contradictions. To get a sense on that, we have with us Sheshadri Chari, who's a leading thinker at the RSS, the Rashtra Samsevak Sangh, who's been a former editor of the organizer as well. And we are also about to be speaking to the former Secretary General of the Lok Sabha, Mr. Sheshadri Chari. Mr. Sheshadri Chari, let me start with you first. It's Republic Day, of course, and the Republic Day is the day when we pledge ourselves to the values of the Constitution, to equality, to justice, to liberty, to fraternity. And I'm sure you heard the very powerful speech that the Prime Minister gave at that time of the Pran Pratishtha of the Ram Mandir, talking about how Indian civilizational values have to also rise. How will these two be managed without any contradiction? Is there any contradiction? And if there's no contradiction, how can we ensure that both can be done without there being contradictions?
See, as the Prime Minister suggested, Vikram, there is no contradiction as far as these two things are concerned. It's a old civilization, new republic. So every time there is a new republic, there have been a number of countries in the world which have refound themselves, reinvigorated themselves, and they have reinvented themselves, but with the old civilizational values. Now, when we talk of civilizational values, now values don't change. Values are eternal. What is eternal is only value. Otherwise, if values are to change as according to the social changes that takes place, then you don't call them values at all. You just call them rules and regulations that keep changing from time to time. Values don't change. Now, for example, telling the truth is a value. Satyam Vada Dharmam Chara. These are all the age-old values. And that is exactly what the Constitution is also saying. And then respect for all faith. I'm not using the word religion, but commonly the word religion is used. Respect for, now the Western world, we have what we call the tolerance for religions. What we say in India is not just tolerance, but respect. Tolerance also has some sort of an authority. I tolerate you is not as correct as saying I respect you. So respect for all faith, all kinds of worship, all methods of worship, what we quote unquote call religion. Fine, we can take the word religion because it is popularly understood also. So these have been the values. Now you call these values as secular in the modern terminology. So what way is it different from what it was 5,000 years ago and what it is now? The Constitution also says the same thing.
So one change, obviously, so if you're looking at, it's a 5,000-year-old civilization, right? And what happened 2,000 years or 3,000 years ago, there are things that are different. As you said, it's a new republic. Things have obviously changed. You have minorities, for example. Many of the other faiths did not even exist 2,000 years ago. Christianity didn't, Islam didn't. These are all new faiths. And there are people now, there's a sizable minority population in India, which didn't exist at that time. Similarly, the concept of Dalit emancipation, Dalit rights, the way that Dalits have to be treated at full equality with everyone. That's where the constitutional values of equality, for example, come in. So as we are rekindling civilizational pride, those values will have to be managed in this entire process. Would you agree with that?
Correct. See, these are all actually what I would say modern happenings. Or this whole idea of minority majority, for example. There was nothing called minority majority. If you go back before pre-Christian, pre-Islam, pre-Christianity, there was no minority. So why should Christianity or Islam be classified as minority? This whole idea of looking at society on a religious grouping itself is wrong. You start looking at religions as a important identity. That is why the word religion gives a very wrong meaning. If you just say methods of worship, Islam is a method of worship. You go to a masjid and pray, offer namaz 5 times a day. And there are Hindu traditions where you offer prayer 3 times a day. What we very colloquially call, I mean, you must have heard this word Sandhya Vandan. So in the morning they do, in the afternoon we do it, in the evening we do it at sunset. What is it? It is the same thing. You go to church every Sunday and pray. Here you go to a temple on certain occasions and pray. There are traditions where you go to the temple almost every day, and you have a temple at home. Similarly, you have a book at home and pray for it. So when you see these as methods of worship, then there are no conflict. But when you see it as religion, then that gives you a separate identity. The moment you get that identity, the religious identity, then this whole idea of minority and majority comes. So
So
this
the
whole idea of minority and majority will have to be looked at from a very fresh point of view. And I strongly object. And another thing is, when we talk in terms of minority, we only talk in terms of Muslims as minority. Parsis are a minority in India, but they never sought this minority status for themselves. Do you know that? If you want to link the past 5,000-year-old civilization with modern republic, then you will have to either take the nomenclatures of the modern republic and give it a new meaning, or you will have to take the nomenclature of the civilizational values and then juxtapose them with the republican values.
So, are there any of the values? So, let's just reassess. If you look at the Constitution, if you look at the preamble of it, and that's something which I think every republic here we should try and do, look at those values and saying, how are we doing? How are we doing on justice? How are we doing on equality? How are we doing on fraternity? How are we doing with, all the aspects that we have pledged ourselves to as a republic? All of those values are still, you think, as important today as they were 77 years ago? And should we continue to pledge ourselves to all those values that there are in our Constitution?
See, as I said, these values don't change. Respect for all kinds of faith or methods of worship doesn't change. Just because you have 85% Hindus, Hindu as a community, as a group, is in majority, but that does not mean the country becomes non-secular. In fact, Hinduism has been the most secular form of faith so far. We have never had a theocracy in our country. Never. So we have always been able to separate these methods of worship and the state. State has never had a religion, except in the case of Emperor Ashoka, who wanted to make Buddhism the state religion for a very short time, but that did not succeed. Except for that very, very short period, otherwise we have never had a theocratic state. So for us, in these 5,000 years of history, we have never allowed the state to be theocratic, and we have successfully distanced the state from the religion, what we call religion or method of worship. We have never had that.
Okay.
But in the Western world, they had this problem. Therefore, to circumvent this problem, they invented a word or a system or a methodology called secularism, where state and church are separated. Now, separation of state and church in the West, how does that concept of secularism fit into our republic, which has always been non-theocratic, which has always been free from the state, has been always free from the method of worship, or you call it religion in the modern terminology. So the values that we had for 5,000 years, the values that were enshrined in the Constitution in 1950 are the same values which are there today, and it has to be followed. If it is not being followed, if there is an aberration, the aberration is not in the Constitution or in the civilization, the aberration is in our behavior. So that is what we have to correct.
So I'm going to talk to you in more detail about this, Dr. Chari, a little later. But thank you so much, sir, for joining us.
Surely.